Thank you for joining us. I am your host, Carrie, and I'm here with Robert Como, the creator and founder of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. So today we're going to be talking about the Chicopee Center neighborhood. So what features are there in this neighborhood?
The canal that is there, and that was built in 1832, is the reason why the neighborhood even exists. So that is a major factor, and we're going to bring that up later. And also there's many churches, because Chicopee Center became the true center of Chicopee in all different ways. Not only did it have the better of the two canals, it had much development around that successful place, and so churches came into place, and we'll talk about that too. And then also, of course, you need homes and schools, and we'll talk about some of those on the way. And we got the college, some cemeteries, and it had a nice positive feel to it. Right around Exchange Street and Springfield Street, you have a lot of restaurants and small, what used to be hotels like the Kendall. Most importantly, of course, you have Chicopee City Hall, and they have a beautiful building for the City Hall. And so if you walk around the downtown area of Chicopee Center, you'll find a lot of beautiful things around. Probably the most eye-popping are the churches. As you walk around Chicopee Street, you get to see a lot of beautiful homes. And if you walk around Springfield Street, you get to see a lot of beautiful homes. But on Springfield Street, they have the best of all, and that's churches. So you get to see the former churches, or churches still being used, especially Catholic churches are there, the Assumption Church is there, and the Holy Name Church is right off this Springfield Street. And so you get to see very much around the area. And one of the best things you possibly do is just walk around and see on your own, and then use my website to help you understand some of the many features that are around.
Tell us about the canal.
Okay, so the canal came first to make this vibrant neighborhood, and that canal was ordered up by Edmund Dwight, the richest person in Western New England. He wanted it to be a canal that distributed water into the mills, and he got the mill owners to move in. First of all, the Eanes brothers, and then the Cabot, and then Thomas Perkins, and then himself. So Edmund Dwight had a mill, the Dwight Mills. And of course, not only do you have a canal distributing water onto the turbines, you also have worker houses across the street from each one of these. So all four mills had worker homes. And of course, you have to develop more and more, and they ended up developing not only the mills, but also storage structures on the upside of the canal, which means the side that wouldn't get water to fall into the turbines. And they were going to use electricity. Some of them are older than electricity, so they're probably using kerosene lamps, but nothing powerful could be done in those. So the structure would go Chicopee River, mills, then canal, and then these distribution homes. Now right there you would have a spike of the railroad. The Connecticut River line came up the river, but you need a spike on the Chicopee River, and that was on the southern edge, right between the storage places and the canal. And you need tiny bridges for pedestrian workers to get over them. And so this canal is a great prototype for a lot of canals that would come around Massachusetts. The Chicopee Falls Canal we'll talk about at some point another day, but this one was the better of the two, and it's more interesting because it's actually there and it's actually somewhat functional.
So, quickly before we continue with the rest of the interview, if you'd like to find out more information or sign up for any of his tours, you can visit his website at holyokecanaltour.org, and to inquire about anything else or any of his private tours, setting them up, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 capital B at yahoo.com. And there you can also discover much more of his many different tours, videos, and photos, and any of the other podcasts that he has to listen. So, getting back to our interview, tell us about the churches.
All right, a lot of churches in Chicopee Center, especially important is the Holy Name Church, which is on South Street, very close to Springfield Street. And that was the first Catholic parish in Western Massachusetts. Started as St. Matthew's in the 1840s. They built up a small wooden church across from the present day Holy Name Church, was on South Street. And that Holy Name was built in 1857. And that's when it started to blossom into a boys' school, a girls' school, a convent, a monastery, a rectory. It became a really full campus. And it helped the neighborhood also to blossom. And so when the Victorian homes started coming around, 1870s to 1910, a lot of them were right there because you had a very active center. Now, what other churches are around? Well, the Grace Episcopal Church is at that same corner, another corner of it, and it was built in 1897. And of course, that one didn't change much, so what you're looking at is very close to what it is. But if you look closely, it's a Catholic church. And also the Assumption Church, which was a full church. It had a school, rectory, convent, all nearby. And that Assumption Church was actually a rebuild of the former Assumption, which was on Bunville Street. And they moved here after a small fire. And if you keep walking down that street, you come to more very beautiful churches. And the next one you come to, across from Assumption, is the Third Congregational Church of Springfield. And that was built when Chicopee was still in Springfield. That's why it has its name. It's not the original, it's a rebuild because the first one, I think, got struck by lightning. And so this Third Congregational Church is from the 1890s. And so you have all these beautiful churches right in a row. And that makes it a very special neighborhood. And other beautiful structures are along the way, so don't miss out on the beautiful homes and also the colleges nearby.
Why are there so many Victorian homes in this neighborhood?
Well, each of the mills had their own worker homes. And so there was 4 companies with 4 sets of worker homes. That was for the lowest economic class, the working class. The middle class was right behind that. Now remember, if this canal was built in 1832, there's no cars, there's no trolley. The middle class was in the cabin-built commons right beyond the worker housing. And that started to fill in, just like the Ames worker housing had behind it a lot of middle-class structures. Now, the upper class, which is the mill owners or the bankers, people of commerce, the politicians, so forth, the upper class, started to move a little bit further away, but they can't move very far away because, again, there's no trolley, there's no cars. And so what they did, they moved onto Springfield Street, maybe 200 to 300 yards away from the mills, and they started building towards the south. So almost all of Springfield Street and many of the side streets, especially South Street, so forth, Grape Street, they had a lot of beautiful Victorian homes on there. It's just showing you that this was a very successful canal. They did a lot of work to make it succeed, and it became very successful and became the definition of what Chicopee is.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for joining us. And again, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org, or you can email him directly at bobcat4214, and be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming fall 2023 and all of 2024's schedule of events as they become available. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Robert Camus, Holyoke's very own local historian and founder of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours and presentations on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets throughout Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. So today he'll be educating us on the Chicopee Falls neighborhood. And so the Chicopee Falls area of Massachusetts had a canal. Tell us about that canal.
All right. The Chicopee Falls Canal is probably the second power canal that used turbines in Massachusetts. There was the Lowell Canal that started being like a canal instead of a navigational canal, power canal. That was the year before. So the Chicopee Canal was 1823. The Lowell Canal they started work on in 1822. And there were waterways that were used for power. For instance, the Charles River through Waltham was used for power, and that was a little earlier. But this was the second canal for power that used turbines. And most people around here don't know that, and it really is not known much about what they did, and I wish I could. Because remember, this is 1823. Anything before 1840 is hard to research. And since everything came so early, it's hard, and no one's really done much more research on this subject. And that's sad, because it deserves it. Now, the Chicopee Falls neighborhood grew from that. Did they have worker homes before that? Not known. And I know that the cemeteries, churches, homes, schools came later. It's known about some of those. But the very beginning, what were they using? Because we know there was no 1823 Catholic churches. What were they using? All right, and I learned a little bit about it, but not an incredible amount. Maybe they just weren't going to any churches. And how did the neighborhood grow from that? It's still not known. So we're going to have to really try to explain that. And it's changed greatly. You can't walk through this neighborhood and try to figure out what the canal is doing. But this much is known. The canal has three parts to it, so it's really three canals. Two of them were tiny, one was big. If you want to follow where its path was, follow where the dike system is. The dike system, if you go on the top of it, that is pretty much where that major canal was. It was probably about 3/4 of a mile long. It had two minor canals that were tiny, maybe 100 or 200 feet long. Each of them also had to have a dam. And so there was three dams through this section. The first one was the strongest, that pushed or diverted water into the Chicopee Falls Canal itself. The name of it actually was very strange. It was the Boston and Springfield Canal. And that's because the companies that owned it were based in Boston and in Springfield. And this Chicopee Falls Canal was still, when this land was still a part of Springfield. Now, the mills came after that, and some of the mills that were in this area, of course, were quite small. The big ones came later. So the Fisk rubber one came much, much later. So this early canal, not much is known, and there's a lot to figure out.
Now, how did the area develop in terms of homes, churches, and schools?
Okay, so first of all, in this area, there came Catholic churches, but they were very first one was in Chicopee Center, and that was a Holy Name Church, and that was about 1845 or so. All right, and the first cemeteries were also in Chicopee Center, the St. Matthew's Cemetery and the Calvary Cemetery. All right, so they were using back then ones that are further away, but they developed their own. So the St. George Church developed in this area for the French Canadians. This early church was St. Joachim. Also, a church developed for the Irish people called the St. Patrick's Church, and that one was formed in 1871, and that was formed on the northern edge of Chicopee River, still in Chicopee Falls. And they developed their own schools. Now, the homes themselves, a lot of these old homes aren't there anymore. Most of the worker housing is gone. There must have been urban renewal at some point, maybe in the 1970s. But there's still some old residential homes. And for instance, Edward Bellamy's home is still there. That's a home probably from the late 1870s. So development did, but where's the very old mills? Where's the very old worker homes? They're gone, pretty much. And that's very sad because if you go to Chicopee Center Canal, they're still there for the most part.
What are some of the other features in the neighborhood?
Okay, there's the East Street Cemetery, and that's a Protestant cemetery. That once you cross the Denny Bridge, there's Broadway Street, and then to the left, there's a cut. That's East Street, and near the beginning of the street, there's the East Street Cemetery, formed very early on, probably about 1825. Now, were they burying Catholics there? Maybe, probably. If they had money, they would have put the Catholic deceased on a cart and brought them out to Boston. But they would have to pay for the cart, they would have to pay for the burial in Boston, which was expensive. So maybe some of the very early Catholics are buried in the East Street Cemetery. But since they weren't poor, they couldn't even afford stones, so there's no stones left in the cemetery to figure out that. Now, I told you about some of the churches. Of course, there's some Protestant churches, Catholic churches. There's a lot of residential features now in this neighborhood that some are very old houses, but some are more modern. So if you go down East Street, you might see some old houses in the beginning, but then towards the end, it's very modern houses, especially down along the side street. The same with Broadway Street. You see some older houses in the beginning, and then it gets very modern as you go down. Now, the borders of the neighborhood are such that if you go south, it's Springfield. If you go more towards the east, it's Indian Orchard part of Springfield. Chicopee Falls is on both sides of Chicopee River, so just over the river itself is the start of Aldenville. And if you go a little further in, like about 3/4 of a mile, you meet the Westover neighborhood towards the northeast. And then the western section, you have its border with Chicopee Center. So it is not the oldest. It's the second oldest neighborhood in Chicopee. The oldest neighborhood itself was where the Chapins settled along Chicopee Street, and that's actually Willimantic. But it is the second. It was formed around 1823 when the canal came in, and a lot of the old homes are gone. But if you search down some of the side streets, especially where Edward Bellamy lived, you'll see some 1870 homes yourselves.
Now, what will the future be like for this neighborhood?
That's a tough question. They put an old age home in where the old canal was, so that and it's very modern looking. That's good. And they got some new commercial centers around there also. So maybe that's the future. As some of these buildings wear out, they'll try to develop them into stores. Remember that it comes off of Memorial Drive right into Chicopee Falls, and so you got lots of cars coming through. And it might develop to be more commercial as you go along. There already are a lot of restaurants along here, a lot of small stores. Now the trend is hard to see though, because there's so many homes around this area. You won't probably see too much commerce take over what's there now.
Well, thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and again, thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And again, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org or email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com.